Robert, is that tape still rolling?
Yeah, it's rolling.
So now we're recording on the second side of the tape, right?
Yeah, Steve. It's the second side.
Is it okay to talk normally?
Why not? Bigfoot people know we're here.
Well, the storm's been over for almost an hour, and we haven't heard anything since they last yelled at us. What's the chances they've left for the night?
No, they're out there.
How do you know that?
I feel them watching us.
Yeah, well, I've got a big question for you. But first I'm going to start a little fire with this wood I brought along. My hands are freezing. Okay, pal, let's make sure that we all understand what's going on here. Now, as I recall, the minute it got dark, you and I headed up into the woods to where we thought a Bigfoot family might be hanging out, right? We got less than 200 yards before I hit a rock whizzing past my head close enough to shave me, right?
So?
But do we duck behind a tree or something? Oh, no. Instead of running for our lives, we stand around with our arms spread out like two scarecrows. Now you tell me this is supposed to let the Bigfoot know that we're the good guys with nothing up our sleeves.
Well, sure,
I have this great picture in my mind, Morgan. This giant Bigfoot is hiding behind a big boulder, right? And he has rocks in his hands, but all we have are sweaty palms. So then a second Bigfoot outfoxes me by breaking off a limb behind us. And when I take my eyes off of spot one to see who's at spot two, spot one Bigfoot, the guy guarding the trail with a handful of rocks, he disappears. I find his footprints, but you won't let me follow him.
So what's your point?
But between the rock and the footprints, we know for sure these big guys are out there. But we go traipsing up the trail anyway. Have I got it straight so far? Am I leaving anything out?
So far, so good.
Yeah, well, all this must have made our big hairy buddies real happy because they showed their great joy by knocking down a whole tree and screaming at us.
Look, didn't I tell you they'd try to intimidate us?
But then we get these two ticked-off Bigfoot people hanging around out there pretending to be owls until we hear what may or may not be a coyote howling, which according to you is probably a third giant guy coming in to join the fun.
Yeah, well, they probably called in a few more.
Hey, Morgan, don't interrupt my picture. Then, here comes a thunderstorm waltzing in that drenches to the skin. So what do we two healthy adult males do? Instead of heading south to get some hot coffee to soothe our weary little souls, we plunk our wet butts down right in the center of an open meadow that's surrounded by so many bushes and trees, we can't see our hands in front of our faces. But all this makes you happy, doesn't it? Why are you happy, Robert? I asked. And my pal Robert Morgan answers, Oh, Steve, I'm really happy because now all the Bigfoot people can sneak up on us in complete silence by stepping on wet leaves. Isn't that wonderful? Everything's in their favor, and we're out here alone, unarmed, and we're as blind as bats because I won't let us turn on our flashlights.
But Steve...
Okay, Robert, here's my question. Am I wrong, or are you getting off on all this?
Gee, aren't you?
Okay. While we wait here in the middle of this lovely meadow to be pillaged and plundered, will you share with us just what it is about your approach that makes you so successful at contacting these giant people they call Bigfoot?
Steve, I honestly have to attribute any special success I've had to my relationship with the Chiricahua Apache, Kaye Nino Cochise.
But first, didn't you have a regular kind of science advisory board with PhDs and all that?
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've had the counsel of a top-flight advisory board that listed 17 scientists, such as anthropologist Dr. Carlton S. Kuhn, George Agogino, Grover Krantz and Peter Lipsio, the naturalist Dr. Jim Butler, the theologian Dr. J. Schoenberg Setzer, plus a whole host of zoologists, botanists, and biologists.
You must have found one hell of a difference between the perspectives of accredited scientists and a Native American.
Well, I've found that our hardcore science has some interesting limitations that are set by the laws we use to perceive our version of reality. Certainly, I found Nino's world was very different than that of academia. I can now empathize with Carlos Castaneda, the anthropologist who wrote about the world of the Yaqui Indian shamanisms. He now recognizes that a separate reality indeed exists outside that corporeal reality that science has always tried to press between the covers of our textbooks. I truly urge our new observers to read, in the order in which they were written, Carlos Castaneda's first 3 books, Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, A Separate Reality, and The Journey to Ixtlan. In many ways, Castaneda and I traveled the same path, but my Don Juan was the Apache Calle Nino Cochise.
Yeah, and all joking aside, folks, I urge everyone to get a copy of Morgan's new book, The Soul Snatchers. You go into some things that are absolutely fascinating. So, while we sit here waiting for our noisy giant friends, can you tell our new observers a little more about how you met Nino and how he influenced your approach to this incredible research?
Well, Ted Ernst of Key West, Florida, introduced me to Nino in 1974. From the moment I walked through that old Apache's door, my life began to curve into a totally different world than I was used to. Steve, have you ever met someone for the first time, yet each of you instantly recognized one another?
You mean like when you think you know each other, but you also couldn't have met before? I definitely had that happen, but I never understood why.
Well, for me it was like meeting my own father after 100 years of separation. In less than an hour after we met, Nino and I were discussing forest giants, life after death, reincarnation, UFOs, abductions, Velikovsky, Jung, druids, parapsychology, and a whole gamut of neat things.
You know, that Nino Cochise absolutely fascinates me. Now, I know he was the grandson of the famous Apache chief Cochise, but wasn't he also the nephew of Geronimo? Man, that guy had to be ancient.
He was. Nino was born in 1874 and died only 2 months shy of his 111th birthday. Can you imagine talking to the man who began life hunting with a bow and arrow, had met Teddy Roosevelt, had ridden alongside Pancho Villa, and at age 92 had handled the controls of a jet aircraft beside Senator Barry Goldwater?
What exactly made Nino himself believe in the Bigfoot, or should I say the Yamprico?
Well, Nino believes in these forest giants because he'd come face to face with a young male near the Arizona-Mexican border when he was about 20 years old. When he told his story to his tribal shaman, Diodet, that Apache man of knowledge gave him some of the same advice that Nino later passed on to me.
So the approach we're using tonight actually came from the shaman Diodet through Nino Cochise.
Well, Nino certainly laid all the groundwork, that's for sure. But the medicine man Ingram Billy and the Miccosukis, and certain members of the Tiger Clan in the Everglades added bits and pieces along the way. Then there was this holy man, Cheng Rinpoche, refugee Tibetan Lama in Moscow. His talks with me in Gorky Park glued everything together concerning the Himalayan Yetis, our forest giants, UFOs, abductions, and a hell of a lot more. In fact, everything that I relate on these subjects in this series of talisman tapes is based upon their combined wisdoms.
Did these spiritual people agree that the Bigfoot are in fact human beings, or did they think they had some extra powers of some sort?
Well, as in all diverse cultures, there are a lot of ways to explain the way things appear to be. Many native cultures took the same path as our own early churches. When they couldn't explain something in logical terms, they simply mystified it or they deified it.
So you don't assign any extraordinary or magical powers to these giant people?
Extraordinary is a subjective term that I better avoid, or we're going to be here for the next 2 weeks. As for magical, let me point out a pitfall. Just because you and I may not be good enough to follow a giant's tracks over stones doesn't mean they use some magical powers to move into some other dimension. It just means we're not good enough to follow their tracks over stones, that's all. I think the best demonstration of insight into the giant people comes from Leluska, a master woodcarver of the Kwakiutl tribe of the Pacific Northwest. Steve, you should see the special transformation mask Leluska carves of the mythical giant cannibal woman, Zunaqua, that some tribes use to scare kids into being good. You know, the old boogeyman routine?
Hold it. I thought you said these guys are gentle. What's this cannibal stuff?
Oh, please notice the term Zunaqua refers to a specific giant as a cannibal. By definition, a cannibal eats its own species, right? By the way, I wish everyone could see the special Zunaqua dance where one of Leluska's transformation masks demonstrates what the Kwakiutls really think of these forest giants. Picture being inside a cedar longhouse where the only lighting is a small fire. Leluska and his family are singing a sacred Zunaqua song to call her from the forest, and maybe you can hear the sound of rain on the cedar shake roof. Suddenly, the big wooden door slams open, and there stands this giant woman with this scary mask on her face. The Zunaqua. To the beat of a drum, this hairy giant woman shambles inside and slowly circles the room with a basket on her arm, as if she's going to stuff it with bad kids. Her face is monstrous and angry, and her blood-red lips are pursed into a permanent whistle. When she has thoroughly scared the bejeebers out of everyone, she suddenly whirls away from the firelight for barely a moment. And when she turns back around, her scary mask has been transformed to reveal another one that is neatly hidden behind the scary one. Only now she looks much more human, and she's not scary anymore. Instead, she looks rather lonely. It's as if she longs to be closer to the Kwakiutl people, to communicate. It's as if she wants to stay. But then the Zunaqua dancer again twists away into the dark shadows, and when she snaps back again, we see that behind that second mask there's a third one that reveals a beautiful, beautiful soul. What the Kwakiutl people have known since the time of the separation is that the forest giants are not only human beings trapped inside a monstrous body, they also have a soul just like our own. So you see, some wise person back in time saw through all the nonsense and recognized the inner sameness we all share.
Look, this may be an iffy subject, but do you think they marry the same way we do?
Steve, one thing is clear. The giant people obviously avoid incest because Mendelian genetics dictate that inbreeding would subject them to deterioration in their physical and mental characteristics. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Therefore, I can deduce that either inbreeding is not occurring, or perhaps the less than perfect don't survive.
But you say the Bigfoot people travel in pairs. So how come sightings are usually one at a time?
Oh, just because you see only one doesn't mean his brother isn't within earshot. They could be as much as a mile or two apart and still feel comfortable.
Something else, too. Most Homo sapiens would have a gun of some sort with them.
True, and that is sad. Why we carry over this unreasonable fear is beyond me. Look, without a gun, people are much more likely to act as a guest in the woods rather than as an invader. There's so little to be afraid of out here. We must stop killing everything.
Okay, but how about if there's coyotes or bears around?
Hey, I've had coyotes around my camps for as long as I can remember, and not once was I ever in any sort of danger.
Yeah, but you know that bears can be a different story, Morgan, especially grizzlies. I mean, you're from Montana.
Well, obviously, everyone should use common sense in bear country. I always tie a bear bell on one shoe or on the tip of my walking stick. The trick is not to surprise anything bigger than yourself.
You told me once that the Bigfoot can detect our attitudes if we carry a gun. Do you really mean that?
Absolutely. Look, if you don't have a gun and you get scared, you can just run away. But if you have a gun within reach, you're liable to use it. This is a very, very critical rule that should never be broken. Never. If your purpose is to invite the Bigfoot to come in close enough to be seen, you leave the guns completely out of it.
Coyote?
Don't know. It's like when we heard the owls a little while ago. When I see the owls and the coyote, then I'll wholly believe it's two owls and a coyote.
I never knew of a coyote that hit trees with sticks.
Nope. That's our friends. Now let's see if they'll come in closer.
You hear that?
Uh-huh. Let's go on talking and see what they do. Remember how it's done. You watch over my shoulder and I'll watch over yours. What do you want to talk about now?
Oh, yeah. Those owl calls remind me of that story you told me about some strange hoots you heard in Washington State that didn't make sense. You said something about them being handed down as some kind of ancient information. What was that all about?
Well, once I took some field researchers up to Mount St. Helens to rendezvous with George Harrison, who was at that time the managing editor for the National Wildlife magazine. The anthropologist Bob Carr and the cinematographer Alan Facemeyer and I set up camp. And the sun had barely gone down when we heard these two owls hooting their way up the canyon just below us. All that first night, they stayed right there hooting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
So what's so strange about that?
Nothing, except when I tried to identify the hoots as belonging to owls native to that area, I drew a blank. For instance, I checked my book and found that I should be hearing either the great horned owl, the long-eared owl, the great gray owl, or maybe the spotted owl. None of these fit the pattern of these hoots, and that bothered me.
So you might be hearing something new. So what?
There's more to it. Each time I tried to get close enough to get one in my spotlight, they'd retreat just enough so that I couldn't see them.
Maybe they just didn't want to get blinded by your spotlights.
Look, if these owls were that disturbed, they usually leave the area and that's that. These just retreated, and then they'd follow me until I was back in camp. Well, they made so much noise that we all decided to go back down and stay until we got a good look. But when we reached the edge of the canyon, it was like we suddenly ran into an invisible wall. All three of us froze in our tracks.
Wait a second, Morgan. You got that strange feeling, didn't you?
Sure enough, when we did book back to our camp, those bloody owls followed us and raised a racket almost as though they were yelling at us. So, my being the director of our little expedition, it was my job to take the initiative. I walked back down there alone. And let me tell you something. By the time I got to the edge of that canyon, my knees were like jelly.
Then what happened?
Everything went silent. No crickets, no frogs, no nighthawks, no bats, nothing. That's when I caught a glimpse of two greenish yellow eyes across the canyon from me. They were moving away from me through the brush at such a slow speed that it was closer to walking than flying.
Didn't your spotlight pick up what they were?
My light wasn't on. All I had was the dim light of a quarter moon. But that's when I realized that the moon was in the sky ahead of me. How could any eyes reflect light that was coming down behind them?
That's impossible.
Yeah, but before all that could sink in, I noticed that those eyes were nearing a bend that would take them completely out of my sight. I didn't think about it, I just shifted to a better position. That's when I got hit with this indefinable mental warning not to move.
Then what did you do?
I didn't move. I just switched on my spotlight. Instantly, something whizzed by my head so close that I felt a shockwave. Guess what? Whatever that was had come from behind me. I tried to tell myself it was a bat or maybe a nighthawk or something. I tried to tell myself it was anything but a rock, till I heard it smash into the far side of that canyon. I went back to camp.
Whoa! That smack was right there, right behind you, man. I think I see something moving right over there at the edge of the woods.
Don't point. Just try to look like we're ignoring them.
Well, at least let me get out my flashlight.
No, it's okay. If you turn on that flashlight, I'll guarantee they'll go away. Just let me go on with my story, and they'll either get frustrated and go away, or they might really get rowdy. Ignoring them drives them nuts. You hear that? Now they're stomping up and down trying to scare us.
This is awesome. How can you expect me to just sit here like this?
Remember the mission. And keep talking, Steve. Just keep talking nice and normal.
Okay. When you got back to your tent on Mount St. Helens, did you tell those other guys about the eyes and the rock and all that?
I didn't get a chance. They were all ready to pack things up and take off right then and there.
Well, nobody likes to admit they get scared, you know. Just like now, I'm not scared, neither are you. Not much.
Oh, there was much more to it than that, Steve. However, it wasn't until much later in my research that I learned there was an almost predictable pattern to this behavior, even between friends. Over the years, I've witnessed lots of would-be field researchers who suddenly got paranoid, argumentative, and sometimes they actually got violent when they even got close to a giant family. Now, Nino told me his tribe had a rule that no one was to ever mention seeing a Yamprico to anyone except a medicine man, and no one except shamans was to have dealings with them.
Didn't the Apaches think the Yamprico had some kind of special powers that scared them?
Not quite. But there is a very strong belief among traditional Native Americans that anyone who even talks about the giant people will either go mad or they'll have what they call bad luck. I've seen its results. It's nothing to play with. I know that my old friends Robert and Spencer Tiger and Victor Osceola of the Miccosukee Nation each saw these giant people of the Everglades. A few months after his encounter, Victor Osceola committed suicide and Robert Tiger was killed in a truly bizarre accident. And the last I heard, Spencer's in a wheelchair for life.
Maybe what happened was just a coincidence.
Really? Then there was the Scotsman John Shelley of Portland, Maine. John was an internationally recognized map dowser and one of the founders of the American Dowsers Association. John Shelley was so good he'd been employed by the United States Navy to find pilots who'd been shot down over the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam.
The Navy sent a dowser to Vietnam?
No. John Shelley did his work from the Naval Air Station in Brunswick, Maine. But even though he was quite successful, the Navy could not admit they were using his extraordinary abilities to save pilots' lives. Now, isn't that a bitch? John Shelley saved lives, but no one could give him the credit.
Wait a second. I thought dowsers only look for water.
Yeah, well, so did I, till I learned better. You have to first understand that John Shelley had been recommended to me by an honored member of my Science Advisory Board, Captain E. Hedblum, who was at that time the senior physician in the United States Navy. Captain Hedblum was a serious man of science, and when he recommended John Shelley, who was I to argue? Anyway, John flew out to Cooper, Washington to work with me in the field. Please keep in mind that this was when I still thought of the giants as animals and that a live capture was the way to go. You know, the old capture one and save them all routine. Shortly after John arrived, I made a series of very stupid mistakes. I'm ashamed to say it now, but in my ignorance, I coordinated what was intended to be a completely sham attack on what John felt was a giant's hiding place.
Why would you do that?
It's an old military tactic to test the strength and response time of your opponent. I wanted to see what the giants would do and where they would go if they thought they were in danger. According to John Shelley, he had pinpointed a small family of giants that had a female and a young child stashed atop a stone cliff that was fairly remote. When John had doused 2 males strategically placed on the slopes below the female's refuge. Since they weren't moving, we assumed they were all asleep. I asked Shelley and Eva Phillips to stay at the base camp to trace the fight or flight patterns of this giant family while we macho boys pretended to attack it. So there we went, a van full of idiots, chanting all sorts of bloody things over the 40-minute drive to where we would launch our little sortie. We poured out of that van and charged up the valley toward that cliff like we were Marines attacking Mount Suribachi.
Man, you've tried just about everything. So what happened then?
Again, we ran into that invisible wall of fear halfway up the valley, and we piled up like we were the Five Stooges. I didn't have to say it twice. We were all more than happy to trot right back down again. You know what John's map dowsing from the base camp told us? It told us that the female and the child had left their safe haven within a few moments of our leaving our base camp. He also said the males had shifted their position as if to anticipate our attack route. That female and the child had traveled over 5 miles before we even got out of the van.
But how in the hell did they know you were coming?
You tell me. The point is the male giants had then swooped down to cut us off. According to a review of John's maps, our attacking force had passed within yards of their posts, and that wall of fear I mentioned had hit us smack on that same spot. Now listen, John had no idea where or even if we had turned around, yet the marks he had on his topographical map was smack on the money.
That was close.
Oh, there's more. Later that same night at 11 p.m., John insisted on going into a certain marsh all alone. You know, for years afterwards, I thought it had been a coincidence that while John was down there in the dark, I had my first sighting of what I must term was a UFO. There were 3 of us standing there waiting for John when Eva Phillips pointed up at a bright light moving across the sky.
Are you sure it wasn't an airplane? I mean, you didn't see any blinking lights, no red and green marker lights, nothing?
Very sure. I've been around aircraft from the time I was 17, and I've seen all sorts of aircraft under all kinds of conditions. That was no conventional aircraft. Now, while I stood there trying to identify this fast-moving object, it suddenly made a 90-degree turn. It didn't bank and it didn't dive. It made a 90-degree turn and dove straight down toward the south slope of Mount St. Helens to a point maybe a mile or 2 from where we were standing. When it was about 1,000 feet up and diving at one hell of a speed, its lights just faded out. I stood there waiting for the crash, but nothing happened.
Well, if it didn't crash, what happened to it?
Don't know. We stood there for probably 10 minutes or more arguing about what we'd seen. That's when we heard the scream.
What scream?
We heard an excruciating scream of terror, and despite his bad heart, John Shelley clawed his way up out of that marsh. He swore something huge had come up behind him and had screamed in his ear.
Poor guy.
Oh, worse. Subsequent to John having his encounter, my entire team of field researchers, excepting Eva Phillips, immediately got so mean and insulting to John that he left for home the following morning. But here's the worst part. After he left us, that generous and good man found that he had lost his ability to douse, even for water. Whatever gift he had had, was gone forever. It hurts to say that John's heart also failed before that same year was out. I sincerely hope no other true dowser ever again tries that on a forest giant.
Well, that's 4.
I'm not finished. Another friend of mine named Victor also had a problem that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. Before moving to Florida, the Reverend Victor Zarley had been a popular Akron, Ohio evangelist who was not given to superstitions beyond his own religious persuasion. I was with Victor Zarley in the Florida Everglades when he caught sight of a giant, and that same night we both saw what appeared to be another UFO. Within a single month, Victor Zarley was somehow transformed from a friendly and an intelligent man into someone who acted as if he was haunted. In fact, he became so erratic and strange that I severed our relationship when I moved to the West Coast. About a year or so later, he called me from Miami to tell me he was on his way out to Los Angeles to meet me. Victor sounded in a panic when he told me he needed to talk of things that were too bizarre for a telephone call.
So what did he want to tell you?
I'll never know. Victor Zarley's heart exploded in the Mojave Desert only 100 miles short of L.A.
I'm beginning to understand why you have such great respect for these Bigfoot. They're nothing to fool around with.
Oh, but there's even more. And it underscores the danger that comes with trying to harm these people. Even the respected explorer and archaeologist Pino Turola may have fallen victim to tragedy when he accidentally harmed the giant people. Pino had spent over 20 years scouring the thickest jungles of Venezuela and Ecuador looking for the legendary lost gold of the Inca Indians. In his travels, he'd somehow stumbled into an area where the legendary Mono Grandes were supposed to live. As a professional scientist, Pino had ignored what he took to be superstitious warnings of his native guides about these mysterious Mono Grandes. So when he finally came face to face with one, he panicked and someone started shooting.
Don't tell me the Mono Grandes killed him, or I'm turning on this spotlight right here and now, and we're getting the hell out of here.
Why? We don't have guns, and we have no way of hurting these people, and they know it. That's exactly why we're safe. These giants only respond to violence. They don't initiate it. Remember my rule. No guns, and you're perfectly safe. You take a gun, I don't guarantee anything.
So what happened to Pino Turola?
Well, Pino himself managed to get away in one piece, but the wounded giant threw one of his Indian guides from a cliff and killed him straight away, and his other Indian guide had some terminal bad luck before they could all reach civilization. In any case, after Pino and I had met in Miami, we agreed to form a joint expedition that would follow the one I'd already committed to that was sponsored through the National Wildlife Federation. Unfortunately, when I was finally free to go to South America with Pino, I got another shock.
Please don't tell me he had bad luck.
Pino Turola was dead.
Well, wait just a minute here. What about all these other Bigfoot hunters like Roger Patterson, Rene DeHinden, John Green, and Peter Byrne? Why are they all okay?
Oh, are they? Roger Patterson had that first encounter where he got that famous film everyone likes to watch. But then he had returned to Bluff Creek with the intent of either killing or capturing a giant. Roger Patterson suddenly died of cancer. As for the other hunters, I don't think they know enough to present a serious threat to the Bigfoot people. If they do, well then we'll see.
Robert, you have to admit that killing one specimen of a Bigfoot would give science their hard evidence, right? Setting my own personal beliefs aside, we don't have any hard evidence that these Bigfoot are anything but an advanced animal. Besides, there's an awful lot of people who won't agree with you that the life of an animal is as sacred as the life of a human.
You know, Steve, there was a time not very long ago when the churches would have burned scientists at the stake had they dared to suggest that animals have emotions, let alone a right to life and liberty. Fortunately for humankind, those churches are mostly out of power now. But let's say some hunter actually kills a giant. What happens if the DNA in the gene count proves that giants are not apes? Now, if they're humans, or even a humanoid, a claim could be made in their behalf that they deserve the same civil rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as ourselves. That hunter might end up facing charges he never dreamed of.
So how about a live capture?
Live captures are absolutely impossible at this time.
Why? They dart animals all over the world. Why couldn't they dart a Bigfoot?
Steve, no one has the slightest clue which drugs are safe for use on the giant people because we don't know how their system works. Most of the drugs we use to dart different species of animals are developed by drugging captive animals of the same species where their exact weights and their health is known. A lot of laboratory animals died until we got it right.
Then you've tried all this stuff.
Yes, I have. but that was when I was still ignorant of who the giant people really were. Still, each time I tried, I had both a doctor and a nurse right there with me to help save them.
So if it's that dangerous, why are some people still trying to dart one?
That's just a big fat snow job. Those darts are certainly overloaded with drugs, and if that specimen dies, those good old boys will claim they made a mistake in the name of science. So sorry.
That may be, but earlier you said that humans are different from apes because they use articulated speech, and you also said that the Bigfoot are not apes. Given that, are you saying we might even talk to these people?
Why not? All we have to do is learn their language. Steve, think about it for a minute. I've seen you tell your dog to do certain things, and he understands because he does it. But how many of his growls, whines, yips, and yowls can you interpret? We always talk about how smart our dogs and cats are because they understand what we say. Well, how about the reverse? Maybe we're the dumb ones. But you know, I think the one thing for certain is that these giants are perfectly content to be left in peace.
So why don't we do that? What would it hurt?
That would be great, if only we could. The problem is, with the increasing intrusion of humankind into the shrinking wildernesses around the world, these people face a choice of either dying off because they can't travel freely enough to locate new gene pools, or they'll be forced to come into contact with humans who, at their present level of understanding, will probably kill them.
So time is really running out for them.
Oh, it's running out fast. Steve, I wouldn't be making this tape if I didn't believe the giants are dangerously close to extinction in North America. Here we are, among the most advanced nations on Earth when it comes to the technologies of war and medicine. Yet neither Canada nor the United States spends a single dime to gain an understanding of these incredible beings.
But what can you and I and all of our new observer friends do to get this thing on the right track?
We can begin by making the general public aware that there is no need to attach violence to this discovery, and that these people have as much right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as we have.
What the hell was that?
Do you have any moose in Ohio?
In zoos? I mean, is that what that was? A dog? Out here?
Remember what I told you about the giants being great imitators?
But there's no moose in Ohio, and if there were, it wouldn't be hanging around with a damn dog.
Ah, but there were moose here 100 years ago. Maybe our giant pals passed the call down through generations. Whatever it is, you keep watching over my shoulders, and I'll do the same for you.
Moose in Ohio. Unbelievable.
Remember, if you see anything, talk to me about it, but don't point. Don't stare at it, and don't raise your voice. Let's just go on with our conversation.
Robert, I gotta tell you, you ask a lot, you know that? All right, we'll see. Oh, you know, you never finished the story of what happened with those owls you were telling me about. Those ones near Mount St. Helens.
Ah, yes, the owls. Hey, since we just heard a moose call where there are no moose, this is a perfect example of what happened with the owls. See, George Harrison came in the next night, and even he couldn't identify those hoots. However, our attention became a little diverted because later that same week I found the first giant tracks ever located in North America through deduction and projection as opposed to sheer accident. As the managing editor of National Wildlife magazine, George was very skeptical about it all, but he had a healthy skepticism. He examined me, the tracks, and everything around him. He ended up writing a great article about it in the National Wildlife magazine.
So no one ever figured out exactly what owls were out there, right?
Oh, I didn't say that. Expert birding people from the National Audubon Society finally told me what we'd all heard. These were the mating calls of the snowy owl.
Stop right there. I can see it coming. Now you're going to tell me that their breeding grounds are not in the state of Washington.
Try a few thousand miles to the north in the Arctic Circle. Now add in the fact that these owls are silent outside their breeding grounds.
Okay, you think it was a Bigfoot just imitating an Arctic owl. Hold it. How would a Bigfoot in the state of Washington know what an owl sounded like if it only hooted within the Arctic Circle?
That's the point. And when I told this same story to Nino Cochise, he pointed out that some Native American tribes have ancient legends about their people traveling out of Mustang and Tibet and Mongolia and into America by way of the Bering Strait land bridge that once joined us to Asia. Now, if the original Native Americans made that journey, why not the Yeti or the Almasti?
And they became the American Yeti, the people we call the forest giants or the Bigfoot.
Bingo. But remember why we began this conversation. We were talking about the intelligence of the forest giants and their ability to communicate, right? So here we have what may be a plausible answer. The ancestors to the giants heard and adopted the call of the snowy owl when they passed through their summer breeding grounds en route to North America 10,000 years ago. Before you say anything, think about the fact that these owls only hoot during the summer breeding season, and wouldn't the giants have migrated only during that same season? If that's true, then let me ask, is it not evident that they cognitively handed down that same call for how many generations?
Now I understand why you always say to get familiar with the animal life in the area you choose to make your study. That one set of out-of-place owl hoots gave you a whole new set of, whoa, man, there it goes again.
What's the matter? I didn't hear anything.
I don't know. I just got this strange feeling that something's moving in on us.
Did you hear something?
I sense it.
Believe it or not, it's a good sign when your sixth sense kicks in. But you have to make sure it's not just your imagination. Just like now, we may not know there's something there by seeing, smelling, or hearing it, but we can sense it. However, be cautious even with yourself. Never ever promote yourself into accepting anything on impulse.
Yeah, but how can you separate reality from imagination under these conditions? I mean, man, I'm stressed out. Just now, I feel something getting closer. But I don't hear anything.
Don't let that fool you. Any sudden silence is tipping you off that they're on the move.
You mean like right now? When it's so quiet, you can feel the silence?
Stand up with me and put your hands out so they can see them. Open them wide enough to prove we have nothing to hide.
We can still talk like before, though, right?
Sure, why not? This isn't a ceremony. We're just letting them know we're empty-handed.
3 quick questions before my mouth dries up again. First, Dr. Grover Krantz of Washington State University published a report describing a certain hand cast he made near Bossburg, Washington. Now, after he examined that hand cast, he said the Sasquatch, as he calls him, does not have an opposing thumb like ours and therefore cannot be human. I looked at the picture of the cast, and it looks to me like that thumb is sticking out way too far to one side to be human. What do you think?
This is why science likes to collect at least 3 specimens of any new species so it can prove which characteristics remain constant. Knowing how easy it is to break a bone in the wilderness and maybe suffer a malformation of sorts, I'm reserving judgment about the position of the thumb of a giant until I can see more than one hand. Let's keep in mind that the Native American legends never mention any physical differences between themselves and the forest giants excepting their size and their lifestyle. However, if you translate nearly all the different names used by the Native Americans to describe the giants, the translations never came out the way Anglos define monsters or apes. The names Sasquatch, Omaha, Yamprico, Yahti, Iwishikachi, Shiwanakchubi, Skookum, Nakani, Wendigo are describing stick Indians or forest giants or lost or wild bush people as a separate but parallel race of humanoids. By the way, speaking only from my own experience, the hair of the adults are usually a dark color. The elderly are a grizzled gray to white, and it seems that the adolescents often display a reddish hue.
Second question, and then I'm going to shut up. You said that the giants bury their dead just like Homo sapiens. How do you know that if no bones have ever been found?
No bones that we know of have been identified by accredited scientists. I think bones have been found, but the persons to whom they had been entrusted didn't have the horsepower to get their finds made public. Of course, that's my personal opinion. However, finding skeletal remains is a bit of a problem because nature has a wonderful system for recycling calcium. If that were not true, we'd be nose deep in trillions of deer and buffalo bones.
But how does that explain your saying that Bigfoot buries their dead?
Again, I defer to my personal Native American mentors. I was told about a forest giant family that was spotted performing a burial. First, they rolled back a boulder that was so large that it could not have been moved by humans without the use of a bulldozer. Then the body was placed under the boulder before it was rolled back into place. Now look, unless the soil conditions are just perfect for preservation, And unless someone with a bulldozer happens to move that specific boulder within a fairly short period of time, there won't be much to find because the rodents and the insects and the worms will have done their job. One small observation. I've had many reports of hairy giants hanging around human graveyards. I used to brush these off as ghost or boogeyman stories until I put together the parallels between the giants' use of big stone boulders for their dead and our use of a headstone. Intriguing coincidence, huh?
There's one last question I gotta squeeze out, Morgan. Your mentioning the UFOs, Victor Zarley, and John Shelley really bothers me, man. Do you really think there's a connection between the Bigfoot and UFOs?
Steve, any connections I can make are discussed in full on our Talisman UFO Pocket Manual tape. As part of this adventure series, I attempted to make an encounter with a UFO, and you'll never guess what happened. I went back out to Mount St. Helens where John Shelley and I... Uh-oh, Steve. Will you look at this?
Oh, my God. There's 3 of them.
Their hands are open. They're showing us empty hands, too. What do you think, Steve? Is this worth it?
I think they're truly, truly beautiful.
Yatehe. Each event that Steve and I have shared with you is based upon an actual encounter. As a seeker of the truth, you may soon count these same adventures among your own accomplishments if, and only if, you choose to follow my nonviolent approach to contacting the forest giant people. NASA's recent announcement that basic cell life may indeed exist on Mars has acted as a loud alarm bell to awaken every seeker on Earth to other such startling potentials. Some may lie just beyond our fingertips. Help me. Help me stretch out our collective hands until we can grasp the truth. For those seekers among you who wish to begin their own ultimate legend quest, I have prepared the Bigfoot Pocket Field Manual as a companion 90-minute audio cassette tape. That manual will provide you with detailed instructions that will cover the step-by-step nuts and bolts of choosing the most likely sites anywhere in the world, and how to conduct your camping or hiking routines in a scientific yet exciting manner that will attract the attention of the forest giants. The Bigfoot Pocket Field Manual is a must for serious seekers. You may reserve your copy directly from the Talisman Media Group or ask your bookseller to obtain a copy for you. And for you seekers who surf the web, don't forget to check out Talisman Media's exciting website at talismanmedia.com. By the way, I promise to answer every seeker's letter if you will enclose a stamped and self-addressed envelope. Believe me, I'm very anxious to hear the details of your own adventures. This is Robert W. Morgan wishing you all happy seeking.
It gave me the most incredible adventure of my entire life.
It's wonderful to know they're out there. I just love it.
I'm convinced that something's out there, that's for sure.
Of course they exist. Native American Indians have always known they exist. And there's someone else that does. My good friend, Robert Morgan.
It gave me the most incredible adventure of my entire
Wonderful
life.
to know they're out there. I just
I'm
love it.
convinced that something's out there, that's for sure.
Of course they exist. Native American Indians have always known they exist. And there's someone else that does. My good friend, Robert Morgan.